Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PRIMO NUTMEG. This is your host Steve. And by the way, if you are a regular listener, please do subscribe to us on YouTube and iTunes, and also like us on Facebook. On today's show, I have Darrell Castle. He is the nominee for the Constitution Party for the office of President of the United States. We are going to discuss Syria, immigration, and also the Federal Reserve. Please stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy. Mr. Castle, thank you very much for being on PRIMO NUTMEG today.
It is my pleasure. I'm so happy to be with you.
So I did want to discuss your presidential campaign, but first I did just want to get a little bit of background info on you. I was reading your biography today. It says that you were a Marine during the Vietnam War, so you are a Vietnam War vet, correct?
Yes.
And I was actually reading, it says that you trained under Oliver North. Is that true as well?
Yeah, I hate to trade on Ollie's name, but yes, that is true. He was my instructor in patrolling when I went through what the Marine Corps refers to as the basic school. It's really a school that where officers are trained to be infantry officers, as all Marine officers are. He was one of the instructors there, yes.
So could you speak a little bit about your time in Vietnam? What years were you there, and what was your experience when you were there?
Well, as you can see from my bio, it was a lifetime changing experience. My Marine Corps years were 1970 to 74, and took about 2 years to get me there. So March of 73, I guess it was, yeah. So it was basically winding down, and there wasn't that much left to do. And it was an interesting time to be in the service in general, because there was a lot of racial unrest, turmoil. Everybody was concerned about it. You see some of the Black Lives Matter stuff that you're seeing today in a different way. We were seeing the same things back then, as there was a lot of unrest, as the racial makeup of the country and attitudes about race were starting to change, and that was reflected very much in the service, so everybody was conscious of it, especially over there where things were different. But
did you
a lot.
Did you actually see conflict? Were you ever in a battle or a firefight?
Well, yes, but not in the sense that some people did. I'm reluctant to I guess my reluctance is to try to take honor from what some people did who had far worse conditions than I had. So,
well, could you speak a little bit though about how, I guess that, seeing war firsthand or being in a war, how that might have changed you?
Well, yes. The first change, I would say, is it changed my perspective on what I thought reality was. It changed the way I viewed the world, the way I viewed my own country. My eyes were kind of open as to what we were doing. And I wasn't the only one. I mean, that was generally becoming the attitude in the military at the time I was there. What, that old Country Joe and the Fish song, what are we fighting for? We came to realize we were true believers, especially the young officers. We believed very much in what the country was trying to do. But when we saw what it really was, we we weren't believers anymore. I mean, it had never occurred to us that our country would send us into something like that based on nothing more than what it was based on. So it was very upsetting, and it was life-changing, and I suppose the best word is disillusioning.
So after you came back from Vietnam, you decided to become a lawyer, and you've become a successful lawyer. You have many different law offices open in different parts of the country. I just want to ask, why did you decide to get involved in law once you came back?
Well, I didn't at first. I went back to graduate school when I first got out with the idea that I could be a college professor. My intent was to get a degree and to get a PhD in history, and I stayed in that program for almost 2 years. I was a semester away from the finals, and I started talking to some professors that I respected, and they started showing me what the employment prospects were in my area, and they were pretty grim. And I said, I don't think this is how I want to spend my life after all. So I went to Michigan to visit my sister who lived there. She lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we had always been close. And my intent was to go out west and camp for 2 months in the mountains and just kind of collect myself. But I stopped by to see her for a while, and she gave me the novel idea that I could look for a job. So I did. I went down to the unemployment office, and the man there said, are you a veteran? I said, yes. And he said, well, General Motors is hiring veterans. So I went with his note to the General Motors employment office, and they hired me right off the bat. And so I was working in a car factory, and I did that for about 6 months. And while I was there, I met a gentleman, a good friend. We became friends and played softball together and went out and did the town together and, went on dates together and things like that. But he was studying to be a lawyer at Michigan State, which was about 60 miles from our factory, and but the company through its union had a policy that if you went to college, they would pay the tuition. That wasn't as big a sacrifice then as it would be now, because tuition was dirt cheap back then. But anyway, I started thinking about that, and I thought maybe I could do that too. I didn't want to spend my life in a car factory, so I thought, okay, I'll go to law school. I'll be a lawyer, and I didn't want to do that in Michigan, so I came home. Essentially, I mean, I was born on the other end of the state, but I had been discharged from the Marine Corps here in West Tennessee, and I kind of liked it. So, University of Memphis accepted me as a student, and so I came here to law school. That would have been about 1976, I guess, something like that. And while here, I met my wife. I don't want to make it sound like all of a sudden I just came up with the novel idea of being a lawyer. I wanted to be a professional in some capacity, and so that seemed like a good idea and a good thing to do, and I made a life out of it.
So you did that for quite a while, and you still have a law firm. Like I said, it is very successful. You have offices in different parts of the country. So when did you decide to get involved in politics?
Well, let me put it like this. I had no involvement in politics from the time I left the Marine Corps until I met a gentleman named Howard Phillips, who was actually the brains and the inspiration behind the Constitution Party. I was kind of dissatisfied, as I said, disillusioned. And I was talking to a gentleman one day who he actually lived in Colorado, and I was out there meeting with him, and he asked me, who are you going to vote for in the upcoming election? That would have been the 92 election. So this would have been the latter part of 1991.
Okay.
And I said, well, I'm probably not going to vote. And he said, well, why don't you talk to my friend Howard Phillips? He's trying to put a new party together. So he gave me the contact information on Howard and a letter of introduction and that sort of thing. So I called Howard and we started talking, and he said that he was in the process of building something, and I'd never heard of Howard before. I had no idea who he was, but it turns out he was a fairly high office holder in the Nixon administration. In fact, he was one of the people who had gone into Mr. Nixon that day and said, Mr. President, for the good of the country, you have to resign. And so he had a pretty significant position there, and I got to know him, and we put together a team of 5 people, and I was one of those 5 people, and we put the party together. We did the platform and so forth, and there were some geniuses in that group of 5. Howard was one of them. He was a Harvard graduate and so forth, and so all the other 4 out of that 5 are all dead now. I'm the last one. But anyway, there was something about the party. Howard convinced us that the Democrats and Republicans were never going to take the country where we all felt it should go, and we felt like the Constitution was gradually dying, and we wanted to try to save it. So that's why we started the party, and I stayed involved and have been involved ever since. Howard and I became dear friends over the years.
It's interesting that happened in that election, too, because, as most people remember, that was the year that Ross Perot ended up getting 20% of the vote. So
yeah, I read... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, I was just going to ask, given that backdrop, I guess there's a couple questions there. One, was there anything particularly about George H.W. Bush that you think caused this sort of reaction among people who might have voted for Republicans in the past? And also, just what was your impressions about Ross Perot and him having that successful campaign the same year that you were starting this party?
Well, Ross Perot, I read his book on Wings of Eagles, and of course, I love that story. I'm a sucker for that kind of thing, and it wasn't until later that I found out that it might not be totally factual, but nevertheless, it was a grand adventure, and I admired him. I admired a man who simply would not leave his employees over there to languish, but said, whether you help me or not, I'm going to get them out. So I like that aspect of him, and I learned later that he was in and out. One day I'm withdrawing from the race, and then he's back in, but
right.
I was naive about politics then. I've learned a lot in the last 25 years, and I've learned that you have to be really careful who you admire. And there just aren't that many admirable characters out there. But anyway, I was an admirer of his at the time, and I would have considered voting for him had we not been trying to do what we were doing, but we had a completely different mindset and we're headed in a different direction.
Again, was there something about the George H.W. Bush administration that you think might have caused this reaction among people who typically would have voted Republican?
Well, I have to tell you that a lot of things have changed in the last 25 years, and what we tried to do in the Constitution Party as we were forming it, and I still do today, is look not so much at the person, at the individual, because that person is, number one, just one person, and also that person is limited in what he or she can do. But it's the ideology of the person that we looked at. And, he was ex-CIA, his read my lips, no new taxes, and so forth. But our concern was the ideology or the philosophy or the policies, if you want to use one of those words. We believed that the Constitution Party was dedicated to the proposition that the original intent of the founders of this country, as expressed in the Constitution, was still relevant and that we could defend it intellectually. And we just came to the conclusion that no Democrat or Republican was ever going to do that. So we had to offer people a different choice. There was nothing about George H.W. Bush personally, that I was troubled with. I mean, he was a World War II veteran. I learned some things about the Bush family over the years that I didn't know at that time. About that his father, Prescott Bush, had essentially been a fairly high official in IG Farm, maybe the CEO. I'm not certain of that, but as they supplied the things for the Nazis and things like that, and after a while you start to develop kind of a they're all in this together type of attitude. But primarily we wanted to return the country to the Constitution, and we didn't feel like either party was ever going to do that.
So can you speak a little bit about what the values of the Constitution Party are and how the party may have developed over the past quarter century?
Well, you've probably done your research on us and have read a little bit of our platform, but
Sure.
As I just said, we believed when we started that the country should be limited, the government rather should be limited to the 17 delegated enumerated powers expressed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. We believed, as is factual, that the states came together, 13 colonies, but after the Revolution, they were states. They were independent entities, and they came together to form a government. It was between the states. The federal government didn't exist, so it could not have been a party to the contract, but this contract was between those 13 states, and they decided to form a general government and to delegate to that government certain of their own powers, and they only gave it 17. So we believed that was still relevant today. Now, that's our foundational principle, but we were also a very strongly pro-life party. We were disturbed by abortion, and we didn't like it, and so forth. And we believed in individual private property rights. We believed in the Bill of Rights and that they should all be binding and so forth. Those are some of the things that we believed, and we knew from personal experience that the Democrat and Republican parties were never going to honor those things, and that over the 25 years we've been proven correct because it's steadily been eroded.
So how has the party structurally changed over the past quarter century? I mean, if it was just 5 of you guys starting this party in 1991, just give me a little bit of the story of, I guess, how the party has grown over the past 25 years, maybe what some of the obstacles have been. Has it been a constant growth, or has it kind of ebbed and flowed in different elections?
Well, it has ebbed and flowed. That's the short answer, but Howard Phillips, our founder, was our presidential candidate for the first 3 elections. That would have been 92, 96, and 2000. And Howard was a towering figure to us, a hero. He was like the father of this movement, and although he was only, I think, 7 years older than me, he was like a political father to me. And he was a very dynamic person, a great orator, and a person that we all looked up to and admired. And he was a great leader as well. When Howard started to become ill and so forth, it desperately wounded us. The party suffered and still does by his loss. Then there was another figure who was a very inspirational type leader, Bill Shearer, who was from California. He and his wife had been in the movement a long time, and they both died. But my point is, up and down, yes, we were naive then, and we thought that we would be successful. We thought when we showed people our platform and so forth that they would flock to us. And that hasn't happened to the extent that we would have liked, but we are still trying to build parties in every state and to develop them from the grassroots on up. But we also believe that you have to have a national party. You have to run candidates for national office if you're going to be a legitimate political party. So this year has been great. As I keep telling people, it's the greatest opportunity in the history of politics, perhaps, for our party, for a third party, because so many people are dissatisfied with both of the Democrat and Republican candidates that it was a great opportunity for us. So, and many Republicans and some disgruntled libertarians even have come our way and provided I would say a bit of youthful enthusiasm. The Ted Cruz.
It is an interesting election. It's an interesting election just because it seems like those top three parties, there's such discontent and disgust for their candidate. You know, for Donald Trump and the Republicans, the fight against Trump was very strong, but it was very divided. You had 15 other Republicans running against him. They couldn't really consolidate behind anyone, except I guess maybe a little bit Ted Cruz towards the end, but still Kasich was in there. Then you had Bernie Sanders fighting Hillary Clinton, and that was about 50-50 towards the end. And then with the Libertarians, Gary Johnson, I mean, you know, there's a lot of Libertarians out there that says he's not really a Libertarian. And on top of that, he's been sort of an embarrassment in some of his recent, you know, not knowing what Aleppo was or not being able to name a foreign leader that he admired, or couldn't name the leader of North Korea. So, you know, there seems to be a great opportunity out there, but it seems like, again, with the whole Republican-Democrat dynamic and the way that half the country hates Donald Trump and half the country hates Hillary Clinton, it seems like it's always a struggle for third parties. So, I mean, then additionally, I'm sure you have ballot access issues. How many states are you on the ballot on currently?
I'm on the ballot in my name. You'll see my name on the ballot in 24 states, but I think there are 23 states in addition that we are registered as a write-in candidate.
So just to get some kind of insight in that, so when it says write-in candidate, that doesn't mean you could just write in anybody, right? And they have to be the Secretary of State.
You have to be registered. You could theoretically you could write down anybody's name, but it would not be counted unless that person was registered. Some states even require you to obtain signatures, just like to be on their ballot. But you have to register and meet certain qualifications and so forth.
Well, so I guess to get back to what I was saying a little earlier, when you have a dynamic like this and you have a candidate like yourself who, again, I think that people who would support you might in past times have supported the Republicans. Why should somebody in those states, or in a battleground state specifically, why would they vote for you over Donald Trump? What is the main issue that makes you different than Donald Trump?
Well, I have a different view of women. That's pretty obvious. I mean, I've been married to the same woman for 38 years. But other than that, I think that Mr. Trump, personally, I think is leading a very, very important movement, a kind of a revolutionary way of thinking. And it really comes down to people whether they can get past the fact that this man is a very flawed candidate. It's unfortunate for people who think like I do that he is a very flawed candidate, because his movement is important. It is a turning away by the people from this whole globalist thing, as Mrs. Clinton said recently in one of the leaks that WikiLeaks put out, the transcript of her speech that she gave to a bank in Brazil. She said she dreamed of a hemisphere, a borderless hemisphere, hemisphere without borders and a hemisphere-wide common market. Well, those who in my end of the political spectrum, there are very few things more horrifying than that. But so he's leading a movement away from that, and I'm not even sure he's aware of it. I don't know if he is or not. But so it really comes down to whether people can get past him, the candidate, and just look at his movement. And many people can't. Some of us are Christians, and we have a strong faith. I am, and I couldn't support him. I wouldn't be able to, for no other reason. It would be a violation of my religious faith to do so. So people have to make that judgment if their principles are stronger than their party or not. Some do. I understand it both ways. I really do. But I offer myself as a choice that they have. They don't have to say, "Well, I'm limited." I encourage people to not accept the view like they used to have in the old Soviet Union. Here are the two candidates that we've chosen for you. You choose either one you want. There are other choices right now. We don't know how much longer that opportunity might exist, but right now it does. So people don't have to be limited to two choices that the party leadership in both parties give us. They have other alternatives, and that's my pitch to them.
So let's get into the issues a little bit. You did mention that speech that Hillary Clinton gave. Now, I don't really trust Hillary Clinton for a lot of reasons, but the things that you cited there, I don't really know if they're so bad per se. As a believer in free trade, I think that it's good that individuals should be able to exchange goods and services across international lines, with other people. I don't really see a flaw in that. So do you think that there is something wrong with just having open borders? And on that same note, with people as well, in a truly free society, would there be walls dividing people? So could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, what is wrong with that part of her agenda?
Well, I'm a free trade person myself. I oppose the trade agreements that we've done that we call free trade agreements for various reasons. But I'm in favor of free trade. In other words, I think we should be able to trade our goods to Mexico for free, and vice versa. That I'm all in favor of. But if you want to talk about a hemisphere-wide open borders, you asked the question, what's wrong with open borders? Well, if you're going to be a nation, you have borders. If you're not a nation, I believe that America is more than just an idea, as Mr. Bush so famously said. It's an idea that could exist anywhere. It's also a place and a heritage. And think about it like this. If you have completely hemisphere-wide open borders, what do you think all those people that Mrs. Clinton purports to represent? She says she represents them, but we know from the emails that she really doesn't. But middle-class people and lower-income people, what's going to happen to their jobs if you open our borders to, Venezuela's in a state of virtual collapse. All the other people in impoverished, distressed countries, Haiti, El Salvador, how are they going to compete with this labor for jobs? That's number one. Number two, what is going to happen to the social welfare state that she purports to build? How are you going to give food stamps to the entire hemisphere? Who can afford that? How will the American taxpayer, which is down to slightly less than 50% now, how will they be able to afford it? It doesn't make any sense, and to me, it says societal collapse. It's a utopian dream that there's bad things out there in it. Let me put it that way.
Well, it seems to me though, if you break it down, the real bad things about it are things that are caused by statist mechanisms already. Like you said, the welfare state would collapse, which, again, maybe there shouldn't be a welfare state. I guess, I'm just trying to think of my own utopia, what that would look like. And if you had free trade and you had an employer who has a business here in the U.S. and they're hiring somebody who was born and raised in the U.S. and then an immigrant comes in and says, I can do that job for cheaper, isn't it okay for that employer to make the decision freely without government coercion as to who they should be able to hire and who they should not be able to hire?
Absolutely, but it would be. You're exactly right. If there were no government regulations, let me back you up a minute and say this. If you want to talk about open borders, if you had open borders, you just said maybe there shouldn't be a welfare state. Well, maybe there shouldn't be. If you had open borders and there was absolutely no welfare state, in other words, no free food, no free housing, no regulation that say you have to hire this person or that person because this person is of this or that, and all property was private property. In other words, there's no public assistance for these people whatsoever. It's just basically every man and woman for himself. That is certainly a lot more palatable to me than simply come and get it, folks. This 50% of the people who still pay taxes will support the entire hemisphere. You know in your own mind that that's not workable. If you want to go that route, it's certainly discussable. But we're a long way from there right now.
So I guess you're saying that given the practical realities of the world as it is, that's why we need closed borders and some kind of vetting process for immigration.
Closed borders is probably not the correct way to say it. I'll say borders. We need borders, and we need secure borders. In other words, as a nation, as a people, my view is that we have a right to know and to decide who is coming into our country and who isn't. My position is that we should have secure borders and be able to know who's coming in, so that if some of them are terrorists, we have the right to keep those people out. That's my view. So I don't use the term closed borders. I use the term secure borders.
On that note, the big controversy seems to be Syrian refugees. And, the reason that there are Syrian refugees is because there is a civil war in Syria. So what are your views on Syria, and what should the United States government's position be on Syria?
Well, you're exactly right in your assessment of why there are Syrian refugees. I forget the French philosopher, but he said all wars are civil wars because all men are brothers. But I'm opposed to war in general. I hate it. I think it's a better alternative than living under somebody else's boot heel. I'm opposed to what we're doing in Syria. I don't think we should be there. I don't think who runs Syria is any of our business. I don't think the United States should be trying to enforce regime change with our military around the world, whether it's Syria or Libya or Ukraine. I'm opposed to that type of conflict, to these continual confrontations, continual efforts to stick our face into every rattlesnake's nest that appears around the world. I'm waiting, have been for most of my life, for there to be a war somewhere that we just say, you know what, folks, I think we're going to pass on that one. That one's, you can have that yourself. I hope that answers your question, but I would be in favor of defending this country with the last drop of my blood if it was threatened and the necessity was there, but most of the time they're nothing but words.
It was interesting watching the recent presidential debates because Hillary Clinton seemed to be saying that the reason we're involved in Syria is to oppose Russia. She seemed to say that a couple times, that what's at stake here is Russian aggression. And it's interesting because Donald Trump, that seems to be an actual point of difference is he seems to be saying otherwise. What is your position on Russia?
Well, first of all, I think Mrs. Clinton simply has picked out the Russians as a scapegoat to try to cover up the scandals coming out of her emails and things like that. She wants to blame them, Russian hackers, and it's nonsense. But my position on Russia is that, I agree with Trump to the extent that if Russia and Iran want to destroy ISIS, we should let them. But it's pretty clear now that the West, meaning the United States primarily, but Western governments, NATO countries, instituted regime change in Ukraine, which was a duly elected, freely elected, I should say, government. But it was very Russian-leaning. Ukraine was the last domino in that entire old Soviet Union chain. And
why do you say that the U.S. was involved? I think the media would say it was a revolution from the ground up. And do you think that the U.S. was involved in instigating that?
I've heard about these color revolutions that are revolutions from the ground up, but I don't buy it. And if you read, of course, I mean, I've never been to Ukraine, so all I have is information that I've been able to determine from my own research. But I don't believe it was a revolution from the ground up. I really don't. Very little of what the government tells you through its media is actually trustworthy. But
sure.
I don't see Russia as a big aggressor in the Middle East as they're being painted to be. Certainly not to the extent that we should be threatening them with nuclear war. And of course, I realize that a lot of that is just posturing before the election. The Russians know that as well as we do. But it's a scenario that doesn't need to be happening.
I guess it's just an interesting dynamic from my perspective because, my understanding of the Cold War, I was born in '86, so I have a very limited memory of the Cold War, if any. But my understanding was that, the Democratic Party and, the liberal media was maybe a little more dovish on Russia. But now it seems like it almost seems like some kind of Cold War conspiracy where you watch Sunday morning news shows and they're talking about Russian hackers constantly. And Russia's going to try to influence the election, and Hillary Clinton saying that during presidential debates. It's just, it's an odd shift. It seems like the Democratic Party has become the hawkish war party all of a sudden.
You're absolutely right. I'm happy to hear you say that. That's my feeling exactly. But to take it back a few years before you were born, during the 60s and the 70s, when all these kids were out there in the street demonstrating against the Vietnam War and so forth, and eventually forced an end to the war. But they're all running the country now, and they're all about war. They want to impose their will on others. The government, political power corrupts. And political power is just the legalized privilege of using brute force against people that haven't harmed anyone. And that's what people on the left and I suppose some people on the right want to do is they want to use the licensed brute force capability of the government to do what they want, to have what they want. They can't just let people be free and think what they want to think. They want to impose their will on others. And unfortunately, I think the American president now kind of sees himself or herself in Mrs. Clinton's view as emperor of the world. So you have that force privilege not just in the United States, but for the whole world. And it's very dangerous. It's part of the limited government that I talk about. Limited government doesn't mean your favorite program might be canceled. It means political power has to be limited to a written document, and the people have to enforce it. But I'm glad to hear you say that about Democrats. I couldn't agree more.
In reading your website, it seems like, you're also against the United Nations. What you just said, it sounds like you're against NATO. So should the United States have any kind of treaties like these or be part of any kind of international organizations like these?
Well, that's a very good question, and the answer is yes. I'm sure there are many places where we should. I just don't think the United Nations is in keeping with the American way of life. I would like to see us out of it for many reasons. There's a podcast on my website, castlereport.us. You're welcome to go and listen to sometime, but there's one on there about why I think we should be out of the United Nations. There's another one about why we should end the Federal Reserve, but I try my best to, since I'm going to take the view that we should be out of the United Nations, I tried my best in that podcast to give my reasons why I felt that way. And so,
coming from Connecticut, a blue state, a very kind of liberal state where, views like that would be very unpopular. I was just wondering if you could maybe elucidate it a little more. So I think that a lot of people would say the United Nations reflects, I guess, what we're trying to achieve, which is a kind of peaceful world where we don't have wars. That was the reason the UN was nominally created after World War II, was to help stop war. And, it would be important for the U.S. to be part of the UN to make sure that we don't go rogue or don't leave the global community, and that would be a bad thing. So I'm just wondering, why is it important that the U.S. not be part of the world community? What's bad about that?
Well, no. You misstated my position. You said not be part of the world community. That's not what I said. I said not be part of the United Nations. I'm all for being part of the world community. I'm all for trading with everybody, for being friends with everybody. But let me point out to you, you said the United Nations was formed to end war, to have people sit down, let us reason together kind of thing. But I'll point out to you that this world, and that means the United States, has been almost constantly at war since we entered that organization. Personally, I don't think that's a coincidence. And I also point out that since we stopped using the constitutional basis for war, we haven't won many. But that's passé now. You don't talk about winning wars; you just fight forever. That argument, it was started to end war. If that's the case, it's been an abject failure, and all we've done for the last 60 years is fight.
So you also brought up the Federal Reserve. I think that that's an issue that never gets discussed. I think during the GOP debates, it came up a couple of times, and I noticed that whenever Ted Cruz said that we should audit the Federal Reserve and have a gold standard, or anything that was even mildly critical, I think Donald Trump just said something about interest rates. The media very quickly seems to come out and demonize that point of view in a very irrational sort of way, and way that's not really thought out and reasoned very well. So I was just wondering if you could give your perspective. You actually said that the Federal Reserve shouldn't just be audited, it should be done away with, it should be abolished. So
yes.
Why should we get rid of the Federal Reserve, and what would replace the Federal Reserve system? Well,
the Federal Reserve was formed in 1913, and it was fraudulent from the beginning for many different reasons, but the way you phrased the question, of course, puts me, the answerer, on the defensive. But I would take the offensive and say that why should we turn our monetary system, which the Constitution says should be run by Congress, why should Congress, which is illegal, basically, it's an inalienable right, but why should they turn it over to a group of private bankers to decide what our monetary system is, what interest rates will be, and that sort of thing? Now, on the Federal Reserve's own website, you'll see that there were two stated reasons for its existence. One was to protect the value of the dollar, and the dollar has lost 98% of its value since it was formed. And the other was to ensure full employment, which is obviously has not happened. What would replace it? Well, Congress should have control of our monetary system to me, I favor a gold-backed currency, at least backed by gold, and to some degree, to add some stability to the currency and to give some credibility to it. It would mean going away from this entire credit-based system, which just piles debt on top of debt, which sooner or later is going to have to be dealt with. I mean, this system has given us a $20 trillion debt that at some point, sooner or later, as they say, but is going to have to be dealt with, or it's going to cause catastrophic problems for the United States and the world. And I got a feeling that sooner is going to come pretty soon, as problems in the European Union with various banks in different countries. Now I think Italy has a referendum similar to the one that Great Britain had set for December 4th. Their largest banks are about to collapse, and even Deutsche Bank's in trouble. We can thank the Federal Reserve and its credit-based money for how that all works. So, the United States and the world economically is going to have to go through the valley at some point, and what matters is what happens on the other side. What kind of system do we have?
I understand originally we did have a bimetallic standard. We have gold and silver backing our currency. But, from what I understand, after Andrew Jackson abolished the second bank of the United States, we had what was called a free banking period where different banks could create their own currencies. And I've heard projections for the future. I actually had John McAfee on the show previously, the antivirus programmer, and he was talking about competing cryptocurrencies where you had things like Bitcoin or Litecoin, if you've heard of those. So I'm curious what you might think about taking the government out of currency entirely and just having a completely, I guess you'd call it privatized competing currency system. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It sounds like a good thing in principle. In principle, it sounds like a good thing. Anytime you can take the government out of something, it's probably a pretty good idea. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies sound good to me at first glance, but I will admit that I don't understand them enough or know enough about them to make an intelligent discussion. I mean, I know a little bit. I've studied them to some degree. I've never used one or owned one. But to answer your question, having the government out of it, yes, it sounds like a good idea.
In all these issues, again, you really sound broadly libertarian. And, again, we have a Libertarian Party who's nominated a candidate who's a former governor, Gary Johnson. I was reading on your Wikipedia page that it says that you have called yourself more libertarian than Gary Johnson. So I'm curious why that is. Why shouldn't people who don't like the Federal Reserve or don't like the UN or don't like the size of government, don't like our foreign entanglements, don't like these wars, why should they vote for you as opposed to Gary Johnson?
Well, number one, that's a misquote. I never made that statement. I've never said I'm more libertarian than Gary Johnson. People have said that about me, and it's been published so many times that people attribute it to me. But to answer your question, I first met Gary, not physically meeting him, but first heard of him when he was a candidate back in 2012. And the way I heard about him was I came across an article that said the best candidate you've never heard of. And I always wanted somebody to write an article like that about me, but I read that and I was impressed by what it said. That this article was primarily dedicated to economics. It was an economics publication, and they talked about how Gary, how conservative he was economically. The positions that they stated for him in there were similar to what I thought, and so I started keeping an eye on him. And he was far more conservative in his approach in 2012 than he is now. But the reasons why people should vote for me instead of him, of course, depend on your point of view. Reason number one would be I'm a very pro-life person. and he's not. He's pro-abortion. Or pro-choice, as he would call it. But if you're a pro-life person, your choice there is pretty clear. The other choice is he's for open borders and I'm for secure borders. Those are some big issues. But the other thing I would say is that I have an understanding of the First Amendment and religious freedom that is different than his. And so if people can look at those two positions and see if you share the same view of religious freedom that I do, and to give you an example of what I mean by that, Gary has said that he thinks that Christian bakers the government should force them to bake wedding cakes for gay couples if they feel like that's a violation of their religious freedom. I don't view it that way. He said that the questioner during that session, you can still find the video on YouTube if you want to check it, but he said that the person said, so you think Nazis, that Jews should be forced to bake wedding cakes for Nazis? And he said, yes, that's my position. So he and I understand religious freedom differently. So there are three issues that where we're different. And actually, for many of us, those are deal breaker issues.
Yeah. I guess I just want to ask the last question too. I would think if I had to think of like a very consistent libertarian, I would think of Ron Paul. I actually saw a picture where you met him in the past. Is there any issue where you disagree with Ron Paul on?
Well, number one, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Dr. Paul. He's always been a hero, I guess is a word. For lack of a better word, I'll use that of mine. I spoke to him just the other day, as a matter of fact. But we have a slightly different view of how abortion should be handled. He takes the position that it's a matter for the states, and that the states should be able to decide those issues. But
so you would actually have a federal ban on abortion?
Well, no, don't jump to conclusions. My view is that under the 5th and 14th Amendment, the 5th Amendment says no person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. So the 14th Amendment applies and uses that same language and applies it to the states. So my position is that the federal government has a constitutional duty to protect innocent life. No person may be deprived of life without due process. That's what it clearly says. Therefore, to kill an innocent person is a federal violation. Yes. So that you might consider that a slight difference if you understand that we're both against it, and I suppose it is in that sense. I mean, as I said, I'm a great admirer of Dr. Paul and have nothing but the most positive things to say about him.
I guess just philosophically, it's interesting because it seems like you want the federal government very, very limited. But there are certain issues where it's okay to have federal enforcement, like border security or like abortion. So I guess maybe just the last question would be, philosophically, what is the role of government? What should government do, and what should government not do?
The role of government as set out by the Constitution is pretty clear. It's all set out in the role of the federal government, that is, in Article 1, Section 8, and those 17 enumerated powers. But what you have to understand is that the Constitution and the founders of this country didn't say no other government exists, no other power exists for government. They said this is the limit of the federal government. All other powers are reserved to the states. The states are sovereign entities, in other words, and can do what they want. That's my view. But you asked me what the purpose of government is. Well, Mr. Jefferson stated pretty well in the Declaration of Independence. He said that rights come from God, and that the purpose of government, he said, for these reasons governments are instituted among men, that being to secure those God-given rights. So I can't state it any better than Thomas Jefferson. The purpose of government is to secure our God-given rights.
Well, Darrell Castle,
let me just sum up for a second before we leave.
Sure.
My view is that the federal government is very limited by the Constitution. That leaves a lot of room for the states to do what they want. And the federal government is not empowered to interfere with those unless they are one of those 17 enumerated powers. And with that said, I will tell you that I've enjoyed our conversation very much. You're a very good interviewer, and you ask good questions.
You know, I actually left one question out. Let me ask you real quick, because it matters, I guess, to the millennial vote. What is your position on marijuana legalization? Is that something that should be handled at the federal level or at the state level?
Should be handled at the state level, but I'm essentially in favor of it.
Okay, good enough.
I've stated my official view has been I'm for decriminalization. And I don't see it as a federal issue. No.
In Tennessee, it's pretty harsh punishments, right?
No, actually, here in Memphis, where I live, the city council just passed a resolution, and it's being enforced as we speak, to make possession of marijuana a simple $50 fine misdemeanor.
Okay. Well, Darrell Castle,
we might even be more enlightened than you folks up there in the very enlightened state of Connecticut.
Actually, they're going to decriminalize it next year. But you know what the problem is too, honestly, just to add my 2 cents on the issue. Even when they decriminalize it or even legalize it, they're still taxing it. So that's still government, trying to capitalize on it.
Yep, absolutely. They're hypocritical that way.
But I guess that's better than being thrown in jail, I suppose, right?
Yeah, that certainly is. No doubt about that.
Well, Darrell Castle, nominee for the Constitution Party, I really do want to thank you very much for being on the show today. And I agree with you on a great many issues, so I really do appreciate your time, and I wish you luck on November 8th.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to have been with you.
And where can folks learn more about you and the Constitution Party?
Well, my campaign website is castle2016.com. And, of course, the party's website is just constitutionparty.com.
Awesome. And just so people in Connecticut know, I believe that you are a write-in candidate here. So
yes,
that is you agree with Mr. Castle, please do write in his name on November the 8th. Thank you again, Mr. Castle. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. If you did enjoy this edition of Primo Nutmeg, please do like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube and iTunes. Also, check out other Primo Nutmeg interviews with Noam Chomsky, Jill Stein, John McAfee, Medea Benjamin, and Cindy Sheehan. Until next time.